Gilles de Rais hero, or monster, an in-depth analysis of the most mysterious case of the 15th century.
Gilles de Rais, 1404-1440. Wealthy nobleman or hero, comrade of Joan of Arc, accused of murdering 140 to 800 children in 8 years, 1432-1440, from Marshal of France to executed criminal controversy over the legitimacy of the trial, and the evidence, a 1992 retrial, declared him innocent.
Comprehensive analysis. Gilles de Rais, when history becomes a mystery.
In the dark pages of the 15th century, there is a story that makes us question human nature justice and how power can conceal or enable the most horrific crimes. It is the story of Gilles de Rais, a man whose name remains controversial. After nearly 600 years, was he a vicious serial killer, or simply the victim of an elaborate political conspiracy?
The beginning of a tragedy.
I believe that to understand Gilles de Rais, we must look at the context of the times in which he lived. 15th century France was not a place for the weak. The 100 Years' War was raging. Feudal society was marked by blatant injustice, and death lurked around every corner. In that context, a child born into the richest aristocratic family in France should have had a life that seemed like paradise. But life rarely turns out the way we expect. Gilles de Montmorency-Laval, born in 1404, is a testament to the fact that wealth and status cannot buy happiness or peace of mind. At just 11 years old, he witnessed the tragic death of his father in a hunting accident, gored to death by a wild boar. I cannot imagine the psychological impact that must have had on a child. What is even more disturbing is that Gilles' mother died shortly afterwards, leaving him in the care of his maternal grandfather, Jean de Craon. This may have been the beginning of the tragedy. According to Gilles' own testimony at the trial, his grandfather had raised him in a way that was too free for all, allowing him to do whatever he wanted without any discipline. I believe that this was not simply a lack of education, but also a lack of love and proper guidance that a child needs.
War heroes. The bright side of money.
But Gilles' life was not all dark. As an adult, he became one of France's greatest war heroes. His assignment as protector of Joan of Arc, who we know as Jeanne d'Arc, is a testament to his military prowess and bravery. I think the relationship between Gilles and Joan of Arc deserves closer examination, as it may hold the key to understanding his psychology. Joan of Arc was not only a religious or national symbol, she also represented a noble ideal of justice and self-sacrifice. Gilles, fighting alongside her, witnessing her purity and strong faith, may have created a deep inner conflict within him. On the one hand, he was inspired by the noble ideal. On the other, his violent nature and dark desires formed since childhood still tormented him. Success on the battlefield catapulted Gilles to the pinnacle of glory. Becoming Maréchal de France at the age of 25 was an extraordinary achievement, demonstrating his leadership and courage. I believe that these victories not only brought him fame, but also nurtured an inflated ego and a sense of entitlement to do whatever he wanted.
The collapse and the suspicious signs.
What is interesting and thought-provoking is that after Joan of Arc was captured in 1430 and burned to death in 1431, Gilles made no attempt to rescue her. This is a point that I think is very important to understanding his character. How could a man who fought alongside Joan of Arc, who shared in her great victories, be so indifferent to her fate? This makes me question the true nature of their relationship and Gilles' psychology. After the death of Joan of Arc, Gilles seems to have suffered a profound psychological crisis. He retreated to his castle and began a life of extravagance bordering on madness. His construction of the Chapel of the Holy Innocents and his selection of young boys with beautiful voices to serve as choir boys is a detail that I think may be deeply symbolic. The name Holy Innocents refers to the children killed by King Herod in the Bible. That a man who was later accused of child murder would choose this name could be a strange coincidence or it could be a sign of deep psychological turmoil. I believe that Gilles may have been going through an internal struggle between memories of the noble ideals that Joan of Arc represented and his own dark desires.
Psychoanalysis, a modern look.
From a modern psychological perspective, I would argue that Gilles de Rais exhibits many of the characteristics of someone who might suffer from antisocial personality disorder. His traumatic childhood, which included the death of his father, the absence of his mother, and the permissive upbringing of his maternal grandfather, may have created deep psychological wounds. Early exposure to violence through war may have intensified latent violent tendencies. I believe that in the medieval environment of war, where killing, torture, and destruction were commonplace, a person with predispositions to violence could easily become more radicalized. In particular, I noticed that Gilles was described as having two distinct sides. On the one hand, he was educated, refined, and artistic. On the other, he was hot-tempered, violent, and unable to control his emotions. This is a typical characteristic of highly intelligent criminals, who are able to hide their true nature behind a perfect social mask.
Evidence and doubt.
However, when we look closely at the evidence against Gilles, there are many things that make me question the legitimacy of the case. The most notable is that there was no physical evidence found in his castles. In a case where the accused was accused of murdering hundreds of children, the fact that no bodies or traces were found is extremely strange. I also question the motives of Gilles' accusers. The Duke of Brittany, who inherited all of Gilles' estates after his execution, had a very clear motive for wanting to get rid of him. The Bishop of Nantes could also gain considerable political power from getting rid of a powerful noble like Gilles. We have seen many cases in history where powerful people have been removed through false accusations. Accusing someone of child murder and conspiring with the devil was a common tactic in the Middle Ages to bring down political enemies. I don't think we can completely rule out the possibility that Gilles was the victim of an elaborate political plot.
Confession under pressure.
Another important point to consider is that Gilles only confessed after being threatened with torture and excommunication. In medieval times, excommunication was considered worse than death because it meant the soul would be condemned to eternal damnation. For a man of faith like Gilles, this was a terrible psychological pressure. I believe that in such circumstances, anyone would confess anything to avoid being excommunicated and tortured. History has proven that confessions made under pressure cannot be considered reliable. Many innocent people have confessed to crimes they never committed just to avoid harsh punishments.
The complexity of medieval justice.
What struck me most about the Gilles de Rais case was how complex and unfair the medieval court system was. In a society where political and religious power were so closely intertwined, it became extremely difficult to distinguish between true justice and political intrigue. I also noticed that although Gilles had been accused of child murder for 8 years, no one in the nobility or church spoke out against him until he made a political mistake by attacking a priest. This makes me wonder, were the child murder charges the real reason for his trial? Or were they just a way to justify getting rid of a disobedient noble?
Sociological perspective.
From a sociological perspective, the Gilles de Rais case also reflects the deep inequalities in medieval society. The fact that hundreds of poor children could disappear without anyone noticing showed a disregard for the lower classes. It was only when children from more affluent families began to disappear that people really took notice. I believe that this is not only true in the Middle Ages, but also reflects the social problems we still face today. The poor, the children who have no one to protect them, are still often the victims of crimes that society does not pay enough attention to.
Cultural and psychological impact.
The story of Gilles de Rais has become an important part of European folklore, with many believing that he was the inspiration for the fairy tale character Bluebeard. I think this shows the profound psychological impact the case had on the human psyche. The fact that a revered war hero could turn into a brutal murderer is a classic example of the duality of human nature. It reminds us that no one is entirely good or entirely bad, and that power can turn a person from hero to monster, or vice versa, from monster to victim.
Analysis of the witnesses.
Another notable fact is that all the witnesses against Gilles were his servants. Henriette and Poitou, two of whom were described as his main accomplices, confessed and gave horrifying details of the crimes. However, I question the reliability of these testimonies. In feudal society, servants were completely dependent on their masters. They could easily be coerced or bribed into giving false testimony. Furthermore, the fact that they also faced the death penalty may have made them willing to say anything in order to gain leniency or to take revenge on their masters. I also noticed that their accounts were suspiciously detailed and matched each other. In fact, when multiple people tell the same story, there are often slight discrepancies in the details. The fact that the accounts match so perfectly can be a sign of prearrangement.
Religious and superstitious background.
The religious context of the time cannot be overlooked when considering the Gilles de Rais case. The 15th century was a time when belief in the devil and witchcraft was strong. Accusing someone of being in league with the devil was an effective way to remove them from society. I think the accusations that Gilles performed rituals to summon the barren demon may have been a way to justify his trial. In the minds of the people at that time, a person in league with the devil could do anything, including the most horrible crimes. Interestingly, Gilles is said to have hired Francesco Prelati, a young Italian priest, to perform these rituals. I question Prelati's true motives. Did he truly believe in the ability to summon demons, or was he just a con man who wanted to take advantage of Gilles' desperation?
Financial issues and social pressures.
Another important factor to consider is Gilles' financial situation in his later years. He spent lavishly to the point of selling off his castles and lands. This may have created tremendous psychological pressure and driven him into despair. I believe that Gilles' poor financial situation may have made him vulnerable to political enemies. An impoverished nobleman is a much easier target than one who is rich and powerful. His lack of money to buy protection or political influence may have made him the perfect prey.
Death and legacy.
The execution of Gilles de Rais on October 26, 1440, brought to an end one of the most controversial trials in history. I note that he was allowed to confess his sins and be readmitted to the church before his death, a privilege not enjoyed by everyone. This makes me question the church's true attitude toward Gilles. If they truly believed he was a vicious murderer and in league with the devil, would they be willing to allow him to be saved? Or was this just a way to maintain the appearance of a fair and humane trial?
Modern perspective.
The 1992 retrial found Gilles innocent by modern legal standards. I think this is significant because it shows the difference between medieval and modern justice. While medieval law accepted confessions under duress and relied on eyewitness testimony, modern law requires hard physical evidence. However, I also admit that retrial, after 500 years, has its own limitations. Much evidence has been lost. Many details have been distorted over time. We cannot be absolutely certain of the truth of the case.
Lessons for today.
The story of Gilles de Rais teaches us several important lessons. First, it reminds us of the importance of protecting children, especially those from vulnerable groups in society. Whether or not Gilles actually committed a crime, the fact that hundreds of children can disappear without anyone caring is a social tragedy. Second, it warns us of the dangers of absolute power. In a society where power is unchecked, anyone can be a victim of abuse. The fact that Gilles was able to do whatever he wanted for 8 years, without anyone daring to intervene if the allegations are true, shows the importance of mechanisms to check power. Third, it reminds us of the importance of a fair court system. The fact that a person can be executed on the basis of flimsy evidence and a coerced confession is a warning of the dangers of unfair trials.
Conclude.
After all the above analysis, I cannot come to a firm conclusion about whether Gilles de Rais actually committed the terrible crimes he is accused of. The evidence and doubts each have their own reasonable points. However, I believe that what is most important is not whether Gilles is guilty or innocent, but the lessons we can learn from this story. It reminds us of the importance of protecting the vulnerable, of the dangers of absolute power, and of the need for a fair court system. The story of Gilles de Rais also shows the complexity of human nature. Whether or not he was actually a murderer, he was a deeply conflicted man. He could be both a brave war hero and a man with dark desires. It reminds us that no one is entirely good or entirely bad, and that we must always be vigilant of the dark side that lurks within ourselves and in society. Ultimately, the story of Gilles de Rais is a testament to the importance of seeking the truth in history. While we may never know the absolute truth about what happened in his castles in the 15th century, continuing to ask questions and seek to uncover the truth is a powerful tool.